I stood in the parking garage at 11:47 at night, watching the notification on my phone that said my stock options had been administratively suspended. The email was signed by Vincent Caldwell, our CEO. The same man who had shaken my hand 6 years ago and promised me that loyalty would be rewarded. I was not angry yet. Anger would come later. Right now, I felt the cold mathematical clarity of someone who had just realized they had been playing chess while everyone else was playing poker. My name is Arlene Whitmore. I am 34 years old. For the last 6 years, I have been the lead platform engineer at Crestwood Analytics, a data security company that I helped build from 12 employees in a converted warehouse to a 200-person operation worth hundreds of millions. Tonight, I learned that the company was being acquired by Titan Industries for $840 million. And tonight, I learned that my equity, the 1.2% of shares I had earned through brutal years of 18-hour days, had been frozen 3 hours before the acquisition announcement. The timeline was surgical. At 6:15 in the evening, I received an automated email from Human Resources. The subject line was Equity Administrative Review. I was in the middle of deploying a critical security patch, so I did not open it immediately. At 6:22, I finally clicked it. The email stated that due to a routine audit, my vested stock options were being placed under temporary review pending clarification of employment classification discrepancies. It used words like procedural and standard protocol. It was corporate language designed to sound boring. At 9:30 in the evening, the company sent an all-hands notification. Crestwood Analytics was being acquired. The deal would close in 45 days. Employees with vested equity would receive payout based on the acquisition price minus applicable fees. I did the math immediately. My 1.2% stake at $840 million meant I was looking at roughly $10 million before taxes. It was life-changing money. It was pay off my mother's medical bills and never worry about rent again money. Except my shares were frozen. I sat in my car and read the equity freeze email again. The wording was careful. It claimed there was a classification error regarding my status as a contractor versus full-time employee during my first 6 months at Crestwood. This was absurd. I had been hired as a full-time senior engineer from day one. I had offer letters. I had tax documents. I had 6 years of W-2 forms proving I was an employee. But the email did not ask me to provide documentation. It simply stated that pending resolution, my equity was inaccessible. I called the HR director, a woman named Patricia Vance. Her voicemail was full. I called the general counsel. No answer. I called Vincent Caldwell directly. The CEO's phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. His message said he was traveling. I knew where Vincent was. He was 3 floors above me in the executive suite, celebrating with Titan's acquisition team. I could see the lights on from the parking garage. I did not sleep that night. I went home to my small apartment and pulled every document I had ever signed. Employment offer letter dated 6 years ago. Stock option grant agreement. Vesting schedule showing I had fully vested 1.2% over 4 years. Performance reviews showing I had exceeded expectations every single year. I scanned everything and uploaded it to a private cloud folder. Then I started searching for patterns. I opened the company directory and cross-referenced every employee who had significant equity. There were 8 of us who held more than 1% of the company. I sent each of them a carefully worded text message asking if they had received any unusual emails from HR. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I had received 5 responses. None of them had been flagged. Their equity was intact. Only mine was frozen. This was not a routine audit. This was targeted. This was intentional. I made coffee and watched the sun rise through my kitchen window. I was too exhausted to be furious. I just felt cold. The next morning, I walked into the Crestwood office at exactly 8 o'clock. The energy in the building was electric. People were congratulating each other. The acquisition was being celebrated as a massive win. Engineers were calculating their payouts on napkins in the break room. I walked straight to Patricia Vance's office. She was there, typing frantically on her computer. When she saw me standing in the doorway, her face went pale. She knew why I was there. I closed the door behind me. I did not sit down. I placed a printed copy of the equity freeze email on her desk. I asked her to explain the classification discrepancy. Patricia would not make eye contact. She said it was flagged by an automated compliance system. I asked her which system. She said she could not disclose that. I asked her when the flag was raised. She hesitated. Then she said it had been identified during the final due diligence review with Titan Industries. I felt my stomach drop. The timing was not an accident. Due diligence is the process where the acquiring company examines every detail of the target company before closing the deal. Titan Industries had been crawling through our financials, our contracts, and our employee records for weeks. If there had been a real problem with my employment classification, it would have been caught during that review. But the freeze did not happen during due diligence. It happened 3 hours before the acquisition announcement. Someone had waited until the last possible moment to lock my shares. I asked Patricia directly if Vincent had ordered the freeze. She stood up and said she could not discuss personnel decisions. She said I should consult with an attorney if I had concerns. Then she asked me to leave her office. I walked out. I did not go to my desk. I went to the conference room on the 3rd floor where I knew the acquisition celebration meeting was being held. Vincent was there, surrounded by Titan executives. I stood in the doorway until he saw me. Our eyes met. He smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Vincent Caldwell was 52 years old, silver-haired, and excellent at pretending to care about his employees. He had founded Crestwood Analytics 8 years ago with money from venture capital investors who believed his pitch about revolutionizing data security. But Vincent was not a builder. He was a salesman. The platform that made Crestwood valuable, the encryption architecture that Titan wanted to acquire, had been designed by me. I had written 60% of the core codebase. I had solved the latency problem that every competitor struggled with. I had worked through holidays and weekends because Vincent had promised me that when the company succeeded, I would be rewarded. And I had believed him. Now he was standing in a room full of people celebrating a deal that would make him $150 million while my equity sat frozen in legal limbo. Vincent walked over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder like we were old friends. He said congratulations. He said this was a great day for everyone. I looked at his hand on my shoulder. Then I looked at his face. I asked him why my shares were frozen. Vincent's smile did not falter. He said it was a technicality. He said the legal team had flagged a small documentation issue that needed to be cleaned up before the acquisition closed. He said it would be resolved quickly. He said I should not worry. I asked him why I was the only person flagged. He said he could not discuss other employee situations. I asked him if he had personally ordered the freeze. Vincent dropped his hand from my shoulder. His smile finally disappeared. He said I was being paranoid. He said I was letting stress cloud my judgment. He suggested I take a few days off to relax. Then he turned and walked back to the Titan executives. He dismissed me like I was a secretary who had interrupted an important meeting. I stood there for 10 seconds. Then I walked out. I did not go back to my desk. I went straight to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I had not called in 2 years. Monroe Blake, corporate attorney. Monroe had helped me review my original stock option agreement when I joined Crestwood. He owed me a favor. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Monroe listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he asked me a single question. Did I have proof that I was a full-time employee from day one? I told him I had everything. Offer letters, tax forms, pay stubs, vesting schedules. He told me to send him everything immediately. He said he would review it and call me back within 2 hours. I forwarded him the entire folder. Then I sat in my car and waited. I did not go back inside. I could not look at Vincent's face without wanting to scream. Monroe called me back in 90 minutes. His voice was tight. He said the equity freeze was legal but barely. He said the company had the right to review employment classifications during major transactions. But he said the timing was suspicious. He said if we could prove that the freeze was pretextual, meaning it was designed to steal my equity rather than fix a legitimate error, we could fight it. But fighting it would take time. And we only had 45 days before the acquisition closed. Monroe explained the mechanics. When the acquisition closed, Titan would pay Crestwood shareholders based on their equity percentage. But if my shares were still frozen at closing, the payout would go into an escrow account controlled by Crestwood's board. The board could hold that money indefinitely while they resolved the classification issue. In theory, they were supposed to release the funds once the issue was cleared. In practice, Monroe said, companies used this tactic to pressure employees into accepting lowball settlements. They would offer me a fraction of what I was owed and tell me it was my only option. If I refused, they would drag the case out for years. By the time I won, if I won, the legal fees would eat most of the payout. Monroe asked me if I wanted to fight. I told him yes. He said it would get ugly. I told him I did not care. He said he would draft a formal demand letter to Crestwood's board. He said we would give them 72 hours to unfreeze my shares. If they refused, we would file a lawsuit. I thanked him and hung up. I went back to my apartment and started digging. If Vincent had orchestrated this freeze, there would be a trail. I opened my laptop and logged into the company's internal communication system. I had access to most of the engineering and operations channels, but not the executive ones. I needed to see what Vincent and the board had been discussing in the weeks leading up to the acquisition. I could not hack into their emails. That would be illegal and stupid. But I could look at metadata. I pulled the server logs for the last 60 days. I filtered for unusual activity. There was a spike in messages between Vincent and the board members starting 3 weeks ago. The volume was abnormal. They were talking about something big. I looked at the timestamps. Most of the messages were sent late at night or early in the morning. They were trying to keep the conversations off the record. I could not read the content, but I could see the pattern. Vincent had been planning something. Then I found it. A calendar invite from 2 weeks ago. The subject line was Equity Optimization Discussion. The attendees were Vincent, Patricia from HR, and the company's general counsel. The meeting was marked private. Equity optimization. The phrase made my blood run cold. I knew what it meant. They had been discussing how to minimize the payout to employees before the acquisition. Freezing my shares was not a mistake. It was part of a plan. I took a screenshot of the calendar invite. Then I went deeper. I pulled the financial records I had access to. Crestwood's cap table, the document showing who owned what percentage of the company, was stored in a shared folder. I opened it. My 1.2% was still listed, but there was a note attached. The note said, pending resolution. I scrolled through the rest of the cap table. Then I saw something strange. 2 weeks ago, a new entity had been added to the shareholder list. It was called Caldwell Holdings LLC. It owned 0.8% of the company. I did not recognize the name, but the timing was suspicious. I ran a search. Caldwell Holdings LLC had been registered in Delaware 12 days ago. The listed owner was Vincent Caldwell. He had created a shell company and given himself additional equity right before the acquisition. I felt sick. Vincent was not just freezing my shares. He was stealing them for himself. I called Monroe immediately. I sent him the screenshots. He swore under his breath. He said this was worse than he thought. He said if we could prove that Vincent had created the shell company to absorb frozen equity, we had a criminal fraud case, not just a civil dispute. But we needed more evidence. We needed to show intent. I told Monroe I would get it. I hung up and opened my laptop again. I needed access to the executive communication channels. I could not hack them, but I knew someone who could. His name was Felix Ortega. Felix was a junior security engineer who worked on my team. He was brilliant, a little reckless, and he owed me. 6 months ago, Felix had accidentally deleted a production database. I had covered for him and rebuilt it overnight before anyone noticed. He would have been fired if I had not saved him. I sent Felix a message asking him to meet me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. He responded immediately. He said he would be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my coat and left. Revenue grew. Media attention followed. Education journals wrote features. But I kept my name out of it. A.J. Whitmore remained anonymous. My parents still thought I was struggling with computer things in my small apartment. The gap between their perception and reality grew wider every day. And I let it grow because that gap had become my freedom. Flying home from the reunion, I replayed memories with new clarity. My college graduation. I'd walked across the stage with honors in computer science. My parents attended but spent the reception comparing me to Mark, who'd graduated medical school the same year. My first job offer. I'd been excited to share the news. My father asked about the salary, then frowned. That's all. Mark's starting salary was twice that. My 25th birthday. They'd thrown me a party but spent the evening talking about other family members' achievements while I stood in the corner, invisible. Every memory followed the same pattern. My accomplishments, when acknowledged at all, were immediately diminished through comparison. I'd spent years thinking something was wrong with me. That I wasn't achieving enough, wasn't impressive enough, wasn't enough. But now I understood. The problem wasn't my lack of success. It was that my success didn't look how they expected it to look. My work was quiet, private, and built without their approval. That made it threatening. They needed me to fail so their narrative about themselves as superior guides could remain intact. My failure justified their control. My struggles proved they'd been right to doubt me. Seeing this pattern clearly didn't make it hurt less, but it did make it make sense. Back home, I made a decision that felt both small and enormous. I blocked my parents' phone numbers. Not out of anger, but out of protection. Every conversation with them left me questioning myself, second-guessing decisions I knew were right, feeling ashamed of successes they couldn't see. I needed distance to think clearly. I sent one email. I need some space to focus on work. I'll reach out when I'm ready. My mother's response came within an hour. Arlene, you're being dramatic. We're family. You can't just cut us off. I didn't reply. My father's email followed. This is immature. Whatever you think we did, you're overreacting. I archived it without reading past the first line. For 3 months, I lived in silence from them. And in that silence I built. NextPath expanded into new markets. Our user base doubled. Educational conferences invited me to speak, though I sent staff members instead, keeping myself anonymous. I also began restructuring the company. Not because I planned to sell it, but because I was preparing to do something bigger with it. Something that would shift NextPath from a business into a foundation. Something permanent. 4 months after the reunion, my mother called from a different number. I answered before realizing who it was. Arlene, thank God. I've been so worried. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion. I'm fine, Mom. We haven't heard from you in months. Your father and I have been beside ourselves. Beside themselves. As if my absence was a crisis rather than a boundary. Why are you calling? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She sighed. We're hosting a gala for the Whitmore Foundation next month. It's a major event. Donors, press, family. It would mean so much if you came. The Whitmore Foundation. My father's charity project, designed more for tax benefits and social status than actual impact. We want to start over, she added softly. Clean slate. What happened at the reunion? We didn't realize how it affected you. The apology was vague enough to be meaningless. They didn't realize. As if awareness was the problem, not the behavior itself. But I said yes. Not because I forgave them. Not because I believed they'd changed. I said yes because I'd been preparing for exactly this moment. And everything was finally ready. The next 3 weeks moved with surgical precision. I met with lawyers, signed documents, reviewed timelines. Next Partha's transition to foundation status was complete. The paperwork sat ready, waiting for the right moment to go public. I also coordinated with the Bellman Foundation. Claire had been updating me on their plans to expand educational access, and I'd made them an offer they couldn't refuse. $5 million. Immediate funding. No strings attached except one. The announcement had to happen on a specific date at a specific time. The weekend of my family's gala. Claire agreed without hesitation. I prepared my outfit for the event. Conservative, understated, exactly what my parents would expect. I rehearsed what I'd say if asked about my work. Vague answers. Nothing that would tip my hand. The night before the gala, I stood in my apartment reviewing everything one final time. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. They'd built a narrative about me being a failure. That narrative had poisoned every interaction, every family gathering, every moment I tried to connect with them. Tomorrow, that narrative would collapse under the weight of reality. Not because I'd argued against it, but because facts don't require defense. The gala was held at the same country hall where the reunion had humiliated me. Walking through those doors again felt surreal. My parents greeted me at the entrance with overwhelming warmth. My mother hugged me tightly. "I'm so glad you came. This means everything." My father shook my hand, pulling me close. "Let's get some photos. Show everyone we're a united family." United. The word tasted false. Cameras appeared. We posed together, their arms around me, smiles perfect for the society pages. "You look good," my father said, studying me. "Doing better." Better. Implying I'd been doing poorly before. "I'm fine," I said simply. Throughout the cocktail hour, they paraded me around like a reformed project. "This is our son Arlene. He's doing much better now." Each introduction came with that same phrase. Much better. As if I'd been sick and was now recovering. I smiled. Shook hands. Made small talk. Inside, I was counting down. The announcement was scheduled for 8:30. It was 7:45. 45 more minutes of playing their game. Then everything would change. At 8 o'clock, the event coordinator took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the Whitmore Foundation Gala." Applause filled the room. "This evening, we're honored to announce a major donation from an anonymous benefactor whose generosity will transform our educational initiatives." My parents beamed, assuming the donor was one of their wealthy friends. "This contribution will fully fund our scholarship program for the next 5 years," the coordinator continued. More applause. My mother squeezed my father's hand proudly. The coordinator paused, looking down at her notes. "The foundation will release the donor's identity tomorrow morning, per their request." My father leaned toward a friend. "Probably the Hendersons. They love this kind of recognition." I sipped my water, saying nothing. Later, the coordinator found me near the bar. She leaned in, voice low. "Mr. Whitmore, are you certain about tomorrow's announcement? Once it's public, there's no taking it back." I met her eyes. "I'm certain." She nodded. "The press release goes out at 9 a.m. Perfect." She walked away, and I felt the final pieces clicking into place. The board held an emergency meeting. Vincent argued that Titan was bluffing. He said they should reject the lower offer and find another buyer. But the board disagreed. They said Crestwood's reputation was damaged. They said no other buyer would pay more than $600 million now. They said Vincent had destroyed the company's value by trying to steal my equity. The board voted to accept Titan's revised offer. Then they voted to remove Vincent as CEO. He was terminated immediately. The board appointed an interim CEO to manage the transition. I watched it all happen from the outside. I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted. But then something unexpected happened. Titan Industries reached out to me directly. They said they wanted to meet. I agreed. I drove to their headquarters. A senior vice president named Oliver Kane greeted me. He said Titan had been impressed by my work at Crestwood. He said they had reviewed the platform I built. He said they wanted to offer me a position as Chief Technology Officer of their security division. The salary was 3 times what I had made at Crestwood. And they were offering me equity in Titan. I asked Oliver why they were offering me this role. He said Titan had done their research. He said they knew I had built the core technology that made Crestwood valuable. He said Vincent had taken credit for my work. He said Titan wanted to work with the real builder, not the fraud. I told Oliver I would think about it. He said they needed an answer within a week. I left the meeting and called Monroe. I told him about the offer. Monroe laughed. He said this was the best possible outcome. He said not only had I gotten my equity back, but I had also destroyed Vincent's career and landed a better job. He said I had won. I told him it did not feel like winning. It felt like surviving. Monroe said sometimes that was the same thing. The acquisition closed 3 weeks later. Titan paid $600 million for Crestwood. My 1.2% stake was worth $7.2 million. It was less than I would have received under the original deal, but it was still life-changing. And I had something else. I had proof that I could stand up to powerful people and win. But the story did not end there. 2 months after the acquisition closed, I received a letter from Vincent's attorney. Vincent was suing me for defamation. He claimed I had falsely accused him of fraud. He claimed the SEC investigation had damaged his reputation. He was seeking $10 million in damages. I showed the letter to Monroe. Monroe said it was a desperate move. He said Vincent had no case. He said we had documented proof of his fraud. But Monroe said we should countersue. He said we should sue Vincent for attempted theft of my equity. We filed the countersuit. The case went to arbitration. The arbitrator reviewed all the evidence. The emails, the cap table, the timeline. The arbitrator ruled in my favor. The arbitrator found that Vincent had intentionally frozen my shares to steal my equity. The arbitrator ordered Vincent to pay me $3 million in damages. Vincent appealed. The appeal was denied. He was ordered to pay. I never saw the money. Vincent declared bankruptcy 6 months later. He had burned through his acquisition payout on legal fees and bad investments. He lost everything. I accepted the job at Titan Industries. I moved to their headquarters in Austin. The work was challenging, but the culture was different. People respected expertise. They valued builders. I was given resources and autonomy. I was allowed to innovate without a CEO taking credit for my work. 6 months into the job, Titan promoted me to senior vice president. My equity in the company vested over 4 years. By the end of the 2nd year, my Titan shares were worth more than my entire Crestwood payout. I bought a house. I paid off my mother's medical bills. I started sleeping through the night again. But I never forgot what Vincent tried to do to me. I never forgot the feeling of standing in that parking garage, watching my equity disappear. I kept a printed copy of his email, the one where he proposed freezing my shares, in a frame on my office wall. It reminded me that loyalty is not rewarded by people like Vincent. Loyalty is exploited. The only thing that protects you is documentation and the willingness to fight. 3 years after the acquisition, I was invited to speak at a tech conference about platform security. During the Q&A session, someone asked me about my time at Crestwood. They asked if I had any regrets about how things ended. I thought about the question. I thought about the frozen equity. I thought about the lawsuit. I thought about Vincent declaring bankruptcy. I said I had one regret. I regretted not acting sooner. I said I had spent 6 years believing that hard work would be rewarded. I said I had trusted Vincent when he promised me that loyalty mattered. I said I should have demanded transparency from day one. I should have insisted on clear contracts and documented agreements. I should have treated the company like the business it was, not like a family. The audience was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire room. After the panel, a young engineer approached me. She said she was working at a startup. She said her CEO had promised her equity but had not put it in writing. She asked what she should do. I told her to get everything in writing. I told her to hire a lawyer. I told her to never trust promises. I still think about that night in the parking garage sometimes. I think about the moment I realized I had been betrayed. I think about the cold clarity that came after the shock. People ask me if I am bitter. I tell them no. Bitterness is what happens when you lose. I did not lose. I fought back. I documented everything. I found the evidence. I exposed the fraud. And I walked away with more than Vincent ever wanted me to have. He tried to steal my equity to enrich himself. Instead, he lost everything. I quadrupled my net worth and built a career on my own terms. The best revenge is not anger. It is not confrontation. The best revenge is standing so tall, so successful, and so unbothered that the people who tried to bury you are forced to look up and see exactly who they underestimated. Vincent froze my shares before the acquisition. He thought he was clever. He thought he had won. But he forgot one thing. The platform he was selling, the technology that made Crestwood valuable, lived in my head. And you cannot freeze knowledge. You cannot steal competence. You can only lose it. And he did.